Okay, folks, let's get started. So today we start the third segment, section, whatever you want to call it, of economic geography. And this one is on different territorial economies, different spaces of the economy. So instead of looking at it from the point of industry, looking at it from the point of view of economic territory. So it's another angle on economic geography. Today's lecture is national economies, states, difference, and trade. Next time we'll talk about state policies in more depth. This is more background on state formation, and then we'll talk about trade, and then we'll talk about why countries trade. And there you go. And we have a fan. What a girl. All right. Sorry for the interruption here. Yes. Okay, you two deal with that. Put it on 2, please. Okay, and why? And then finish up talking about supranational kind of continental blocks. So part 3 here, economic territories, where economies take place, are different scales. Very important in geography to talk about different scales, and we will end up this segment talking about cities and regions. The smallest scale we'll go to, although we were at the scale of the factory, remember, and of the cluster. So we'll come back down to that lower scale, but right now we're starting at the kind of middle scale, which is still pretty big, which is the nation state. And we have territorial economies, but it matters how bounded they are. Some are open systems, like cities and regions and continents, and others have been bounded, like nation states that have borders, or even something like the European Union has a clear border. And we'll talk about unification of those spaces and the political unification of them through states. It's a really important process for getting capitalism and the market going and for economic development, as we'll see next time. So keys for today, economic territories and the modern state as the key one that we have to start with, the one that everybody takes for granted. And then we have to talk about how states make economies. Sorry, gotta close that. Is that on 2 or on 3, that fan? Okay, because it seems pretty loud. That's better. It's not quite as loud. Thank you. Okay, and then trade. We'll talk about trade as a main form of international relations. We'll talk in lecture 11 about a different kind of international relations, warfare and imperialism. But today we're talking about trade, and trade balance, trade imbalance, some of the mythology, some of the institutions, some of the myths of neoliberal trade. Then we'll talk about national differences, and that they're based in the different histories and different social and political arrangements of states. We can't go very deep into that, but we do have to touch on it. And then finally, these new continental challengers to the United States, which is itself a kind of continent. So we'll talk about that to wrap things up today. So 4 topics: the modern state, international trade, national traits, and continental blocks. Okay? Do let the man with the hobbled fellow in there. Okay. All right, modern state, modern economy. There really are no modern economies without modern states. We hear a lot about globalization, which is, of course, advanced a long way, but without the modern state, there is no development of the modern capitalist system, industrialization. The two go hand in hand. They're the basic economic geographic unit that almost all economics just takes as given. So all international trade theory, all economics just says, well, take Germany, the United States, Japan, and let's talk about it. But as geographers, we're always interested in, well, where did they come from, and why are they there? Political scientists are interested in this too, but generally not from an economic point of view. And so states are not yet transcended by globalization, despite an awful lot of easy theorization. And yet globalization is challenging modern states. We won't go into that. You hear a lot about that. We won't go into that today anyway. Maybe next lecture. Okay, under the modern state, let's talk about the economy, politics. I have state and revolution is really about origin of states, consolidation of states, and success and failure of state economies. So some very general things that you don't need to write everything down, okay? You need rules. Markets need states. The idea of a market that just happens without protection, without rules, is a fiction. It's a very common fiction in economics. It's part of the mythology of the market. But the reality is that markets need rules, and they need states to enforce them. They need rules of property and exchange, above all. They need money systems, which almost always require states. They need banking systems, state currencies that they can do there, that our exchanges can be transacted in. They need spatial unity. Larger integrated markets are really important. Single currencies, equal laws across space, and so on. This is what a national government gives you, a national state gives you. And it gives you protection. It protects your property and your wealth. It protects the rules, enforcing the law. So for instance, you get a lot of jawboning by the U.S. in recent years towards China. You see a lot in business news about how China needs more modern, i.e. capitalist rules of the game, so everybody knows what the rules are, and it's not arbitrary power. Now the problem is, in history of the last 500 years, there's plenty of cases of arbitrary power that makes it difficult to do business. And having non-arbitrary, that is, rule-bound, law-bound systems really helps business and the market proceed. And then you also need government in the sense of administration, infrastructure, or controlling borders, running the courts. You need administration, despite everything you hear out of the mouths of debating Republican candidates. Conversely, states need economies. So state power in the modern world rests unalterably on the power of and the strength of an economy. You need a strong economy to be a successful state. If you want to have your bright, shiny military toys, if you want to go and give trouble to your neighbors, if you want to rule over other countries, or if you simply want to be rich and bank a lot of money, and do the things you want to do for your country. If you want your peasantry to get better off, you need money. And where are you going to get the money? You're going to get it out of the economy. So states rely on economies. They rely on them for taxes. They rely on them for the general strength of the economy, the monetary system, and so on, and their ability to do things like make armaments and buy armaments. Okay? And states, therefore, have a vested interest in promoting the well-being and growth of economies. Now, that doesn't mean they all do. And maybe I should have put that as a sub here. The state can lead the way, which will be lecture 10. The state can also be a vehicle for plundering the economy for personal gain. But that has very bad effects on economic development, as we see in places like Zimbabwe and the Congo Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. When it's just a clique that's basically plundering the economy, there's no stability, the rules, it's arbitrary. Zimbabwe, which was the most prosperous, second most prosperous economy in southern Africa, is now a mess. So it doesn't work. So the modern state and the capitalist economy really go together. State and politics. Well, once you start talking about states and governments, you necessarily are talking about politics. So we have economics departments, and we have poli-sci departments, and we have geography departments, and supposedly never the twain shall meet, or the three shall meet, but they do. And And you can't antiseptically divide these. Now, the economists generally try to. They're the worst. But it doesn't work. Because once you're talking about the state being fundamental to economics, and not just economic policy in the directed sense, but in the whole success of economic development and market rules and so on, then you're talking about politics. Because you've got to get those things done, and if they're not done, bad things happen. And classical political economy was called political economy because it understood that this was a political thing, that the state had to intervene to create modern labor markets, or to create a navy, or whatever it was, or a solid Bank of England. But modern economics tried to forget this and pretend that you can talk about markets in the abstract. Okay. Of course, if you talk about politics, you necessarily talk about power and the exercise of power, and that is never even, it's never equal. There can be power for mischief and power for good, and so on. So one of the key questions that comes up in all economic development is, okay, what's the role of the state going to be? And that's really what we're arguing about in America. It's not so much the state shouldn't be there, it's who's going to control it. The Republicans or the Democrats, business or the working class or the people, and that's, of course, always up in the air. But it turns out, according to Peter Evans, who teaches here in sociology, I read a wonderful book called Embedded Autonomy. If you look at economic development policy, the best policies tend to come in situations where there's a relative balance between the power of the capitalist and the power of the state. Too much power to the state, you tend to get parasitism. Too much power to the capitalist, you tend to get very ineffective state policies and a different kind of plunder. So both of these cartoons are wrong, but I put them there because that's the best I could find. They were kind of fun. So the idea that government is just a shakedown artist is nonsense. It collects taxes to do things for the economy. And the idea that the capitalists completely control the state is also wrong, because states have many times dominated the capitalists or done things that capitalists couldn't agree on that were for the benefit of the capitalists. Finally, of course, there's the international state system, which becomes relevant when we're talking about trade and imperialism. Won't talk much more about the imperial part today, but once you get the modern state, you get the multiplication of modern states. States come into conflict over borders, over control of territory, over economic power and policies, and so on, which often leads to war, or conversely, leads to international law and institutions like the UN or the EU to try to restrain war and conflict and put some kind of limit on economic competition. That is, compete economically, don't just compete through conquest and arms. Because you can do it either way. And as we saw before, remember the smash up of Europe with the two world wars is about using the state and state power to grab territory and end up fighting over who's going to control what colonies, who's going to control what territory, who's going to be in charge. And that didn't work out so well, really. It's too costly, too bloody, and so there have been some moves like the UN to try and stop that, even though some fanatic right-wingers think the UN is some kind of global conspiracy. What can I say? Okay, state and revolution. Well, here I just want to talk about the origins of the modern state. The modern state goes back famously to most people say the Treaty of Westphalia, but that's only one of the sources. It really has 3 or 4 different sources, but they all go back to the 17th, 18th century with the rise of the modern market that we already talked about. This is before the Industrial Revolution. The rise of the modern market, the rise of the world market, and world trade, and world conquest. You start to get modern states that did different things. Now, I'm not going to go into what they did, but you can tick it off on the fingers. They systematically raised taxes, had a central army or a navy, and had civil government, competent civil government, which made them very different from feudal states and kings. So modern states, pretty much everybody agrees, date from around 1500, but are really start to consolidate in the form we recognize by the 1600s. Treaty of Westphalia is after the 30 Years' War in Germany, gets rid of the Holy Roman Empire, starts to give rights to little various states within Germany. At the same time, you get the British Civil War, the English Civil War, which is actually a revolution, where the Puritans win, they chop off the king's head. Pretty clearly a revolution. And by 1688, although they put a king back in, Parliament rules, and along with the Bank of England. And this is the era of John Locke, the great political theorist of liberalism. It's the era of Newton and the birth of modern science, and a number of other things. Newton, by the way, was a state official. He was briefly the chancellor, I think chancellor of the Exchequer, dealing with money and accounts. Curious. No wonder he wanted to do calculus. France, of course, famously a little later, a century later, with their revolution, although they were getting a fairly modern state under the kings. It wasn't good enough, and it exploded in 1789. Getting into the 19th century, Greece is another very early European state, breaking away from the Ottoman Empire. Now, equally important is what happened in the Americas at the end of the 18th century, with the breakaway of the U.S., then Haiti, then Spanish South America breaks away in the early 19th century. These are all echoing back and forth with Europe. So this isn't something just started in Europe, came to the Americas. It's across the whole Atlantic system, which is the center of the modern world economy in the 17th and 18th century. But then the whole thing snowballs in the 19th century. And of course, we're getting into the early 19th century I've mentioned, but as we go on to the 19th century, we get new states arising in Europe, like Germany, and they're arising directly in competition with Britain and France. They see what Britain and France are doing. They see that they're making a lot of economic progress and military progress, and to catch up, Prussia consolidates Germany under Bismarck. Russia, of course, will modernize at this time. And so on. Italy, taking a page also from Britain, France, and Germany, consolidates about the same time, 1870 roughly. In the Americas, Canada and Brazil break away. They hadn't yet. They were still colonies. And in Asia, as we talked about, Japan gets the Meiji Revolution. And a little later, I've put these in the 19th century for simplicity, Thailand and China will have revolutions or revolts and put in modern states. Then the World Wars, of course, has a huge influence over the spread of the modern state. World War I completely overturns the old order in what's left of the old order in Europe. And of course, the 2 great empires that are still left, well, 3 really. The Austro-Hungarian breaks up into a series of small states. The Ottoman Empire in the Middle East breaks up, which, as this map says, the world's largest empire in the 1600s. That breaks up into modern states. We'll get independent Turkey and so on in the early 19th century, with Ataturk, really the modern Turkish state. And Russia, of course, implodes in World War I, and you get the Russian Revolution, which is also a modern state. It's not a capitalist state, but it's a modern state. Post-World War II, again, after the devastation, the French and French, German, British empires, colonial empires all fall apart. You start to get the worldwide independence movements across Africa, the Caribbean. India breaks away, of course, a very big one, Southeast Asia, and so on. And then here at the end of the 20th century, one of the last great empires, the USSR, breaks up. And all those Central Asian states become independent, Eastern Europe becomes independent, and so on. So the only empires left are China and the United States, which are way too big for world peace. But that's another story. All states have kind of origin stories. They have differential origins. I don't want to go into this. There's lots written about this in poli sci. Just kind of give you a list here. Don't take it too seriously. But know that they have different origins. They can originate in internal revolutions or break away colonies or break away from previously unified countries. Like Czechoslovakia recently breaks into and becomes Czech Republic and Slovakian Republic. Slovakia, right, Slovenia is another one. Well, of course, the Balkans breaks up, Yugoslavia breaks up, now we have another set of states. The partition of this of southern Asia into India and Pakistan, then Pakistan breaks up, and Bangladesh becomes independent, and so on, and also Sri Lanka out of the British Empire. But that was really one area. Everybody saw themselves as more or less part of the same civilization, not everybody, but most people. And it was broken up by British fiat, actually, a rather bad idea. The Brits did a lot of bad partitions. In the Middle East and Iraq, and they did it badly pretty much everywhere they touched. Nice going Brits. Then the unifications, like Germany and Italy. Italy had always been these city-states, and it got hammered together by Garibaldi and co. into modern Italy. But it still acts like a bunch of states, which is sort of interesting. Okay, so which raises our next issue, which is you've got to consolidate these things. We tend to treat states, well, the U.S. had a revolution, that's over. France had a revolution, that's over. Mexico had a revolution, that's over, right? Now we can just talk about modern economies. But it ain't over. It ain't over till the fat lady sings on the barricades. I don't know, whatever. It's not over. It's never over. We are still, the United States and Mexico are still joining over the southern border, right? The Mexicans have the right to kind of come into our border and violate our territory, our white territory. Is that, what are we doing? Building a wall. How insecure can you be? So the U.S. is still worried. We're all worried about terrorists and people creeping and crawling into the country. We're still worried about that border issue, right? That means that it ain't over. Despite the fact we think we're the world's strongest, we're always waving at the flag and so on. But why are we so insecure? Because this is never over. So there are really long, interesting histories of territorial consolidation and political consolidation of modern states. Well, we had this little civil war in the United States. Remember that, baby? That's about territory, right? It starts about territory. We don't want two countries. The Union. That's what it was originally about. It only changed to slavery later on. But all kinds of countries have regional revolts. Burma still can't put it together. They have a horrible dictatorship that's endlessly trying to repress so-called tribal revolts in the highlands. China is still suppressing Tibet. Is Tibet part of China or ain't it? Okay, you'd think China had this solved centuries ago, but no. Okay, and then of course internally, like Mexico after the revolution, how many revolts and changes of government and dictatorships did Mexico have? 1830s, 1840s, 1870. Then they had the Porfiriato. Then they had a revolution. And they got the PRI. Then they threw out the PRI recently. But up until the revolution, certainly for a century, Mexico was not consolidated. Oh, and that's right. U.S. carved off half of Mexico, which was tough for the territorial consolidation part. We consolidated that into the U.S. So we had another problem besides the Civil War, right? We had to integrate the West, which was northern Mexico, and so on. But other places you think of solid. I mean, France, how many revolutions did they have in the 19th century? They had 3 more, 1830, 1848, 1870. And they're still a mess in the 20th century, in the 30s, because the left got in and all of a sudden, oh, that's not a proper government. And then, of course, they get defeated by Germany and end up under Pétain. So, again, it takes a while. And they keep rewriting. We're now on the fifth republic in France, I think. So you write a new constitution. And a lot of the early history of modern states is what I have to call a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. That is, the new strongest class, the capitalists, often merchants, some industrialists, financiers, and their retainers and so on, in France are the ones who rule France. It isn't a democracy. First you get Napoleon, and then you get Metternich imposing a new king, then they have a couple more revolts, and then you get Napoleon's nephew in the Second Empire. France is booming, but it's in a dictatorship. It's a military dictatorship. And even after 1870, when they repressed the Civil War, the Paris Commune, it's still it's a democracy in name, but the popular classes have very little input. How about German democracy? Not terribly democratic under the Kaiser still, and so on and so on. So a lot of these places are not, Japan is a emperor and a military dictatorship from the Meiji Restoration until World War II. And so that's very common. And today, the reason I say that is because today we're always looking back and we're always looking out at other countries and saying, why don't those Kenyans get their shit together? What's wrong with those people? But we have the same problems. All developed countries, all of the rich countries went through long periods of state consolidation, which we see a lot of African and Asian countries still going through. Okay, I've got to start skipping because I'm going on too long. And then there's this whole process of social consolidation that I won't touch. I just put it up here. How do you make a modern country? Why do you think we wave the flag and sing the song and make the pledge and all that stuff? It's to remind us all that we are Americans. But why do we have to be reminded? Because somebody is worried that we're not all going to be Americans. And this isn't just a new thing with immigration. When I was a little kid, they started the pledge. Nobody pledged before that. Nobody sang, when I was young, nobody sang the national anthem at baseball and football games. Or God Bless America at the 7th inning, which is even worse. It's a really terrible song. And so on. But you saw there's a cultural element, a political element. The economy works its magic too. You start doing business with people and you start to feel connected to them. And that kind of economic integration is really important.